Now we're jumping back in time and across the ocean to a very different world. Erdington, in 1817, was a quiet English village just outside Birmingham, a place of rolling hills, stone cottages, and tight-knit communities where everyone knew everyone else's business. Or so they thought. The morning of May 27th dawned cold and misty. Farmer Thomas Asprey was making his usual rounds, checking his livestock and surveying his fields. As he walked along the boundary of his property, something in a water-filled pit caught his eye. At first, he thought it might be a bundle of discarded clothing, but as he got closer, the horrible truth became clear. Floating face down in the murky water was the body of a young woman, her long dark hair spread around her like a fan. The victim was quickly identified as Mary Ashford, 20 years old, known throughout the village as a gentle soul with an uncommonly beautiful face. Mary worked as a domestic servant for several families in the area and was saving money to eventually open her own small shop. The evening of May 26th had been special in Erdington. The Tyburn House Inn was hosting one of its popular monthly dances, and young people from miles around came to socialize, dance, and perhaps find romance. Mary had been looking forward to the dance for weeks. She'd saved up to buy new ribbons for her hair and had spent the afternoon helping her friend Sarah Butler press her best dress. But as they prepared together, Sarah later recalled, Mary seemed unusually anxious. "I have such bad feelings about tonight," Mary told her friend. "Something feels wrong, but I can't say what." Sarah tried to reassure her, suggesting maybe Mary was just nervous about seeing someone she fancied at the dance. But the feeling of dread seemed to follow Mary throughout the evening. At the Tyburn House Inn, Mary danced with several young men, but witnesses noticed she kept glancing toward the door as if expecting trouble. Around 9 p.m., she was approached by Abraham Thornton, a 27-year-old bricklayer known throughout the area for his physical strength and his way with women. Thornton was what we might today call a player. He was handsome, charming when he wanted to be, and had a reputation for pursuing women aggressively. Several witnesses later testified that he had been talking about Mary Ashford for weeks, saying he intended to make her his before the night was over. Mary seemed reluctant to dance with Thornton, but social customs of the time made it difficult for a woman to refuse a direct invitation. They danced twice, and witnesses reported seeing them in conversation near the inn's back door around 11 p.m. What happened next would become the subject of intense scrutiny and debate for generations. Thornton was arrested the following morning. The case against him seemed straightforward. He was the last person seen with Mary. He had publicly expressed his intentions toward her, and muddy footprints matching his boots were found near the pit where her body was discovered. The local magistrate, Sir John Sylvester, took personal charge of the investigation. This was unusual for what might seem like a routine case, but Mary Ashford's murder had shocked the usually peaceful community, and there was significant pressure to solve it quickly. The physical evidence seemed damning. Mary's dress was torn, suggesting a struggle. There were scratches on her arms, consistent with someone grabbing her forcefully. Most importantly, the mud on Thornton's clothing when he was arrested matched samples taken from around the murder scene. But Thornton, despite his reputation as a rough character, was not unintelligent. When formally charged, he surprised everyone by requesting legal representation and insisting on his right to a proper defense. Abraham Thornton's trial began on August 8, 1817, at Warwick Assizes. The courtroom was packed with spectators from across the region, and newspaper reporters came from as far away as London to cover the proceedings. The prosecution, led by Mr. Reeder, laid out what seemed like an overwhelming case. Multiple witnesses placed Thornton with Mary on the night of her death. His own admissions showed he had been pursuing her for weeks. The physical evidence, the mud, the footprints, his presence in the area, all pointed to his guilt. But when Thornton's defense attorney, Mr. Copley, began presenting his client's case, the courtroom was stunned by the detail and precision of Thornton's alibi. Thornton claimed that yes, he had been with Mary Ashford, and yes, they had been intimate, but that she was alive and well when he left her around midnight. He then provided a minute-by-minute account of his movements for the rest of the night. According to Thornton's testimony, after parting with Mary, he had walked to the home of his friend James Hayden, arriving around 12:30 a.m. Hayden confirmed this, saying Thornton had seemed normal, even cheerful, when he arrived. Thornton claimed he stayed at Hayden's house until around 2 a.m., drinking ale and discussing plans for work the following week. Hayden and his wife both confirmed these details. Most crucially, Thornton said that around 2:15 a.m., he had walked to the home of another friend, William Jennings, to borrow a cart for some bricklaying work planned for the next day. This would have placed him nearly 3 miles from where Mary's body was found, at around the time medical experts estimated she was killed. William Jennings took the stand and confirmed every detail of Thornton's story. He remembered the time precisely because his wife had just given birth the week before, and he was getting up regularly to check on the baby. He was certain Thornton had arrived around 2:15 a.m. and had stayed until nearly 4 a.m., helping to load tools into the cart. The defense's presentation of Thornton's alibi was so detailed and well corroborated that it created reasonable doubt in the minds of the jurors. After deliberating for just 6 minutes, remarkably quick even for that era, they returned a verdict of not guilty. The public reaction was immediate and explosive. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse shouting, "Murder!" and "Justice denied." Many believed that Thornton's friends had lied to protect him, possibly in exchange for money or other favors. Mary Ashford's brother, William, was devastated by the verdict. A quiet man who worked as a carpenter, William had been close to his sister and was determined to see her killer punished. William Ashford consulted with legal experts and discovered an obscure procedure called an appeal of murder. This ancient legal mechanism, dating back to medieval times, allowed the family of a murder victim to demand a second trial even after an acquittal. Unlike modern double jeopardy protections, this was considered a completely separate legal proceeding. On November 17, 1817, Abraham Thornton was brought before the King's Bench in London to answer William Ashford's appeal of murder. The courtroom was even more packed than his first trial, with nobility, legal scholars, and curious members of the public all eager to witness this rare legal proceeding. What happened next stunned the nation and made legal history. When asked how he would answer the appeal, Thornton's attorney made a motion that no one expected. Citing ancient English law that had never been formally abolished, Thornton demanded his right to trial by combat. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Trial by combat was a medieval practice where legal disputes could be settled through physical battle, based on the belief that God would ensure victory for the righteous party. While the law had not been used in centuries, it had technically never been repealed. Thornton, a powerfully built bricklayer, threw down a leather gauntlet in the traditional manner and declared his willingness to defend his innocence with his life. William Ashford, a slight man in his early 30s, was faced with an impossible choice: accept the challenge and almost certainly die in combat against a much stronger opponent, or decline and see his sister's killer go free forever. After agonizing deliberation with his legal advisors, William Ashford declined the challenge. According to the ancient law, this meant the court had no choice but to discharge Thornton permanently. The Thornton case caused such a scandal that Parliament was forced to act. In 1818, they passed the Criminal Appeals Act, which abolished both the appeal of murder and trial by combat. Abraham Thornton had the dubious honor of being the last person in English legal history to successfully invoke trial by combat. But legal victory didn't mean social acceptance. Thornton found himself ostracized by his community. Former friends crossed the street to avoid him. He lost his job and found it impossible to find new work anywhere in the region. In 1820, Thornton emigrated to America, settling somewhere in the Ohio River Valley. Records suggest he died in the 1840s, but he never achieved the anonymity he sought. Even in America, Stories of the English bricklayer who had escaped murder charges through trial by combat followed him. Mary Ashford was buried in the churchyard at Sutton Coldfield, and for over a century and a half, her case remained a historical footnote, a fascinating example of how archaic laws could thwart justice, but otherwise just another old unsolved murder. Until May 27, 1974, exactly 157 years later, in the exact same town, Barbara Forrest was 20 years old, the same age Mary Ashford had been. She worked as a children's nurse at Linden Hospital in nearby Solihull, a job she loved despite the long hours and modest pay. Like Mary Ashford more than a century before her, Barbara was known for her gentle nature and striking beauty. She had long, dark hair, similar to Mary's, and friends described her as someone who always put others before herself. On the evening of May 26, 1974, Barbara went out dancing with friends at the Elizabethan Ballroom in Birmingham. It was supposed to be a celebration. She had just been accepted for a promotion at the hospital and wanted to enjoy a night out before her increased responsibilities began. But as the evening progressed, Barbara seemed increasingly uneasy. She told her friend Janet Phillips that she had a terrible feeling about tonight and kept saying that May was going to be unlucky for her. She kept looking around like she expected something bad to happen, Janet later told police. I asked her if she wanted to leave early, but she said she didn't want to spoil everyone else's fun. Around 9:30 p.m., Barbara was approached by a man named Michael Thornton. The 24-year-old factory worker had been watching her from across the dance floor for most of the evening. 4 days later, on May 30th, 1974, Barbara's body was discovered in Pipe Hayes Park, less than a mile from where Mary Ashford had been found 157 years earlier. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled with her own scarf. Detective Inspector Tony Blockley was assigned to lead the investigation. A 15-year veteran of the West Midlands Police, Blockley initially approached it as a straightforward murder case. It wasn't until several days into the investigation that the historical parallels began to emerge. Michael Thornton worked at a factory that supplied medical equipment to various hospitals, including Linden Hospital, where Barbara was employed. He admitted to police that he had seen her at work occasionally and had been attracted to her for some time. Thornton's story was similar to Abraham Thornton's testimony 157 years earlier. He claimed that yes, he had danced with Barbara, and yes, he had walked with her outside the ballroom around 11 p.m., but that she was alive and well when they parted ways. According to Michael Thornton, Barbara had seemed upset about something and had asked to be left alone. He said he had walked her to the bus stop, waited until her bus arrived around 11:30 p.m., and then gone to meet friends at a pub called The Crown. Just like his namesake in 1817, Michael Thornton presented a detailed alibi supported by multiple witnesses. 3 friends, David Walsh, Peter Morrison, and Gary Stevens, all testified that Thornton had arrived at The Crown around midnight and had stayed with them until closing time at 2 a.m. The bartender, Margaret Henley, confirmed seeing Thornton there and remembered him clearly because he had been unusually talkative about meeting a beautiful nurse earlier that evening. After the pub closed, Thornton claimed he and his friends had gone to Walsh's flat, where they continued drinking and playing cards until around 4 a.m. All 3 friends corroborated this story, providing specific details about their conversations and the card games they had played. Medical evidence suggested Barbara had been killed between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. on May 27th, exactly the time period when Michael Thornton claimed to be playing cards with his friends. Michael Thornton's trial began in October 1974, with media attention from across Britain and even international outlets fascinated by the historical parallels. The prosecution, led by James Morton, QC, argued that the similarities to the 1817 case were irrelevant coincidence and that the evidence against Thornton was strong. Barbara had been seen leaving the ballroom with him. He had admitted to being attracted to her, and fibers from his jacket were found on her clothing. But the defense, headed by Sir David Napley, focused relentlessly on Thornton's alibi. Unlike the 1817 case, they had additional evidence: pub receipts showing purchases made by Thornton's group, and even a Polaroid photograph taken at Walsh's flat that showed Thornton in the background during the crucial time period. The jury deliberated for 3 hours before returning a not guilty verdict. Like Abraham Thornton, 157 years before him, Michael Thornton walked free amid public outrage and widespread belief that justice had been denied. As news of Michael Thornton's acquittal spread, journalists began to investigate the historical parallels more deeply. What they discovered was so extraordinary that it captured international attention and sparked debates about coincidence, fate, and the nature of reality itself. The similarities between the two cases were not just general, they were startlingly specific. The victims. Both women were exactly 20 years old. Both were described as exceptionally beautiful, with long dark hair. Both worked in service professions, Mary as a domestic servant, Barbara as a nurse. Both had expressed strong premonitions of doom on the nights they died. Both used almost identical language. Mary said she had bad feelings about the dance. Barbara said May would be unlucky for her. The circumstances. Both murders occurred on May 27th, exactly 157 years apart. Both women had gone dancing the night before their deaths. Both were found less than a mile apart. Pipe Hayes Park had been farmland in 1817. Both were last seen alive with men named Thornton. Both Thorntons were physically powerful men, known for pursuing women. The legal proceedings. Both Thorntons were arrested and charged with murder. Both presented detailed alibis supported by multiple witnesses. Both were acquitted amid public outrage and widespread belief in their guilt. Both left their communities shortly after their trials. In the years following Barbara Forrest's murder, local folklore began to develop around what became known as the Erdington Curse. Residents reported strange phenomena near both murder sites, unexplained cold spots, the sound of a woman crying, and sightings of figures matching the descriptions of both Mary and Barbara. Mrs. Dorothy Clark, who lived near Pipe Hayes Park, claimed to have seen both women on multiple occasions between 1975 and 1980. They appear together sometimes, she told a local newspaper in 1981. Walking along the path where Barbara was found, but dressed in old-fashioned clothes like Mary would have worn. They seemed to be warning other young women to stay away from the area. Whether or not one believes in such supernatural explanations, the practical effect was real. Parents in Erdington began keeping their teenage daughters inside after dark, and the areas where both murders occurred remained largely deserted after sunset for years.